The family had planned the trip for months. Alex and Linda, along with their teenage daughter, Megan, and 9-year-old son, Noah, were finally going on a much-needed vacation. The destination was an island off the coast of Maine, isolated, serene, and promising an escape from their hectic lives. When they arrived at the mainland harbor, the locals seemed overly interested in their plans. An elderly fisherman with a face as weathered as driftwood stopped them as they loaded their luggage onto the small ferry. "You're heading to Blackthorn Island?" he asked, his voice hoarse and tinged with unease. "That's right," Alex replied cheerfully. "We've rented a cabin there for the week." The old man's face darkened. "You should reconsider. Strange things happen there. Folks say the island remembers." Linda laughed nervously. "Thanks for the warning, but we'll be fine." As the ferry pulled away from the dock, the man's gaze lingered on them, his expression a mix of pity and fear. The cabin was picturesque, nestled in a grove of pine trees with a view of the rocky shoreline. But the air felt heavy, and the silence of the island was unnerving. No birds sang, no waves lapped against the shore, only the whisper of the wind through the trees. Their first night was uneventful, though Megan complained of hearing whispers outside her window. Alex dismissed it as the wind, but Linda couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The next day, they decided to explore the island. They found a narrow trail that wound through the forest, leading to a dilapidated lighthouse. As they approached, Noah pointed to something etched into the base of the structure. "What does it say, Dad?" he asked. Alex brushed away the moss and read aloud. "The sea takes what the island keeps." Linda frowned. Creepy. Probably some old sailor's superstition. Inside the lighthouse, they found signs of abandonment, rusted tools, a toppled chair, and a journal. Megan picked it up, flipping through the brittle pages. "It's a log," she said. "The last entry is from 1947. She read aloud. "The island's hunger grows. I hear them at night. They call to me, begging to be free. But I cannot leave, not until another comes." A chill ran through them all. That night the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. Megan woke with a start, swearing she saw shadowy figures outside her window. Linda found Noah sleepwalking near the shoreline, muttering about the voices. The next morning, Alex decided they needed to leave. But when they returned to the dock, the ferry was gone. The radio in the cabin crackled to life, but all they could hear was static interspersed with faint voices, pleading, crying, warning. Desperate, Alex tried using the cabin's landline, but the call wouldn't connect. Instead, a woman's voice whispered through the receiver, "You can't leave. Not yet." That evening, they heard footsteps outside. Alex armed himself with a fireplace poker and ventured out, only to find the same old fisherman from the harbor standing at the edge of the woods. "I tried to warn you," the man said. "The island doesn't let go easily." Before Alex could respond, the man melted into the shadows. Inside, the family huddled together, their fear mounting as the whispers grew into wails. The cabin shook as if gripped by a storm, though the sky outside was clear. Megan screamed, pointing to the corner of the room. A shadowy figure stood there, its form barely human. "Leave," it rasped, "or stay forever." By dawn, the family had packed what they could carry and set off on foot, determined to find another way off the island. They reached the lighthouse, hoping the height would give them a view of any passing boats. But inside, they found more than they bargained for. The walls were covered in names, etched in desperation. At the very top, they discovered a trapdoor leading to a small room. Inside was the skeletal remains of the lighthouse keeper, clutching a rusted key. The ferry key, Alex realized. With no time to waste, they rushed back to the dock. As they boarded the ferry, the island seemed to shudder, the trees bending as if in protest. As they sailed away, the whispers faded, replaced by an eerie silence. When they reached the mainland, the old fisherman was waiting. "You're lucky," he said. "Most don't make it back." Alex handed him the key. "Keep it," he said. "No one should ever go there again." The fisherman nodded, but his expression remained grim. The island always finds a way. Weeks later, as Linda unpacked their bags, she found something that didn't belong: the lighthouse keeper's journal. Its pages were blank, save for a single line scrawled on the last page. "The sea takes what the island keeps." It was a long-awaited family vacation, and Emma had picked out the perfect cabin nestled deep in the mountains. The online photos showcased a cozy wooden house surrounded by lush trees, promising peace and tranquility, a much-needed escape from their hectic lives. Emma, her husband Greg, and their 2 teenage kids, Lily and Max, couldn't wait to settle into their secluded retreat. The first few days were everything they hoped for. Morning hikes, evenings by the fireplace, and board games filled with laughter made the cabin feel like a sanctuary. But on the 3rd night, as the family sat down for dinner, Emma felt an inexplicable unease. The wind howled louder than usual, and the trees outside seemed to sway with an unnatural rhythm. "Did you lock the back door?" Emma asked Greg as she set down a pot of steaming stew. Greg frowned. "I'm pretty sure I did. Why?" Emma shrugged, trying to shake off the feeling. "No reason. Just feels different tonight." After dinner, the kids retreated to their rooms while Emma and Greg stayed up, enjoying the crackling fire. Just as Emma began to relax, a sharp knock echoed through the cabin. She froze. "Who could that be out here?" Greg said, his voice low. Emma shook her head. "Maybe a lost hiker?" Greg grabbed a flashlight and opened the door cautiously. No one was there. The only sound was the rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. "Weird," he muttered, closing the door and locking it firmly. As the night wore on, strange occurrences began to pile up. Footsteps creaked on the wooden porch. Faint whispers seemed to drift through the walls, and Max swore he saw a shadow move across the window despite the curtains being drawn. By the next morning, the family was on edge. "Maybe it's just the isolation getting to us," Greg suggested. "We're not used to being this far away from everything." But Emma wasn't convinced. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. Determined to get to the bottom of it, she decided to explore the cabin's surroundings while Greg took the kids fishing. As Emma wandered behind the cabin, she stumbled upon an old well, its cover partially broken. Curious, she peered inside, but saw only darkness. Just as she turned to leave, she noticed a faint carving on one of the nearby trees. "Stay out." A chill ran down her spine. She hurried back to the cabin and waited anxiously for Greg and the kids to return. When they did, she told them about the carving. "Probably just some prank," Greg said, trying to sound reassuring. "These cabins have been around for years. Who knows who wrote that?" But that night, the tension in the cabin reached its peak. The whispers grew louder, almost taunting. Shadows darted across the walls, and the air felt heavy with dread. At midnight, the power went out, plunging the cabin into complete darkness. "Everyone stay together," Greg ordered, grabbing a lantern. "We'll check the breaker box." As they stepped outside, the family froze. Standing at the edge of the forest was a figure. Tall, gaunt, and motionless, its face was obscured, but its intent was clear. It was watching them. Greg raised the lantern, his voice trembling. "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure didn't respond. Instead, it slowly raised a hand and pointed toward the well Emma had discovered earlier. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the figure vanished into the trees. The family rushed back inside and barricaded the doors and windows. No one slept that night, each of them listening intently for any sign of the intruder. By morning, they decided they had to leave. Packing hurriedly, they piled into their car and drove away, the cabin's eerie silence lingering in their minds. As they reached the main road, Emma glanced in the rear-view mirror. For a split second, she thought she saw the figure standing in the cabin's window, watching them leave. To this day, the family refuses to talk about what happened during their mountain vacation. The cabin remains listed online, its photos as inviting as ever. But Emma knows better. Some places are meant to be left alone. For years, Evan and his girlfriend, Mia, had dreamed of a vacation by the sea. When they found an affordable listing for a remote lighthouse-turned rental, it seemed too good to pass up. The photos depicted a rustic, charming place, perched on a cliff with breathtaking ocean views. It was everything they wanted: romantic, secluded, and adventurous. The couple arrived on a bright, breezy afternoon. The lighthouse was as beautiful as the pictures suggested, with its weathered white walls and tall, narrow windows. They were greeted by the owner, an elderly man named Harold, who handed them the keys and offered some advice. "Stay inside after dark," he said, his voice serious. "The ocean's beauty hides its dangers, and whatever you do, don't climb to the top of the tower." Evan laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke. But Mia noticed Harold's grim expression and felt a twinge of unease. Once they settled in, the couple spent the day exploring the rocky shoreline and taking photos of the stunning landscape. The waves crashed below the cliffs, and the salty breeze carried the cries of seagulls. It felt like paradise. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the lighthouse transformed. Shadows crept along its walls, and the air grew colder. Mia lit the old oil lamps Harold had left for them, their warm glow providing a false sense of comfort. That night, Mia woke to the sound of footsteps echoing up the spiral staircase. She nudged Evan awake. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Evan listened and frowned. "It's probably the wind. These old buildings make all kinds of noises." But Mia wasn't convinced. The sound was rhythmic and deliberate, like someone ascending the stairs. The next morning, they decided to explore the lighthouse further. The ground floor contained their living quarters, while the upper levels were locked, just as Harold had said. Despite his warning, Evan's curiosity was piqued. By midday, he had picked the lock to the first level. The room was filled with old maritime equipment, a dusty telescope, rusted compasses, and faded maps. A strange chill lingered in the air, and Mia felt as if they were intruding. "Let's go back," she urged, but Evan waved her off. "It's just an old lighthouse. What's the harm?" That night the footsteps returned, louder this time. The sound seemed to circle the room, and a faint tapping echoed against the walls. Mia clutched Evan's arm, her fear palpable. "Someone's here," she insisted. "We need to leave." Evan tried to reassure her, but even he was unnerved. Grabbing a flashlight, he decided to investigate. As he climbed the stairs, the tapping grew louder. When he reached the first level, he found nothing but the empty room they had explored earlier. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered and died, plunging him into darkness. A cold hand brushed his shoulder, and he stumbled back, heart pounding. Rushing down the stairs, he locked the door behind him and tried to shake off the experience. "It's just my imagination," he told himself, but deep down, he knew something was wrong. The next day, they resolved to leave, but a fierce storm rolled in, making the cliffside roads impassable. They were trapped. That night, the footsteps returned, accompanied by whispers. The voices were faint but unmistakable, murmuring words in a language neither of them recognized. The oil lamps flickered as if a gust of wind had swept through the room. Evan's fear turned to defiance. "If this place is haunted, I'm going to find out what's at the top of the tower," he declared. "Don't!" Mia pleaded. "Harold warned us." But Evan was determined. Armed with the flashlight and a sense of bravado, he began the ascent. Mia stayed behind, praying he'd change his mind. As Evan climbed, the air grew colder, and the whispers became louder. By the time he reached the top, the flashlight flickered again, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The room was empty, save for a single chair facing the window. As he approached the chair, the door slammed shut behind him. Evan turned, but there was no one there. The whispers grew deafening, and he felt an invisible force press against him, pushing him toward the window. Below, the storm raged, waves crashing violently against the rocks. Mia waited anxiously, but Evan didn't return. Finally, mustering her courage, she climbed the stairs. When she reached the top, the room was empty. The chair was overturned, and the window was wide open. Evan was gone. The storm subsided the next morning, and Mia fled the lighthouse, reporting Evan's disappearance to the authorities. Despite extensive searches, he was never found. Months later, Mia received a package containing an old photograph of the lighthouse. In the window of the top room, she saw a faint figure, a man staring out at the sea. It was Evan. She never returned to the lighthouse, and its listing was quietly removed. But locals say that on stormy nights, a light still shines from the tower, and if you listen closely, you can hear whispers carried on the wind.